Masechet Gittin Daf Samech Aleph. We have a few more items regarding Darkei Shalom from the last Mishnah, and we're almost finished this fifth Perek. We're going to see one more Mishnah today. More items that the rabbis made because of Darkei Shalom. So we're up to Mesudot Chayav Ofot Agim Yesh Bahen Gezel. That if you take something from an animal, from a trap. And so if I set a trap for an animal, bird, or fish, so technically mideoraita, it's not mine because even though it's in my trap, it's not on my land. I didn't actually take it into my hands, and so there was no act of a transaction that put it into my ownership. And therefore, if someone else takes it mideoraita, they can take it. However, that's going to cause a lot of problems. We're going to get into fights. This was my trap. How you took my thing, and you say no, it wasn't mine, and therefore the rabbi said, because of Darkei Shalom, if it's in my trap, then it belongs to me, and you should not take it. We saw that Rabbi Yosef said, no, this is not because of Darkei Shalom. This is full-fledged robbery. So let's explain. Be'uzle ve'ohare, if we're talking about a net or a woven trap, a net is an enclosure, and therefore when the fish goes into the net, here's one example of some kind of a woven trap, right? And the fish goes into it, so it's actually in a receptacle. Kula amala pelige. In that case, everyone agrees that that's considered full theft. It's in my receptacle, so therefore it's mine, and there's no machloket. Even Tanna Kama would agree that it's totally mine. Ki pelige belechi vekorkere. Rather, the disagreement between Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yosef was when, let's say, it's trapped by a fish hook or some other item, kokere. It means something like an arrow or a board, maybe a board with nails or some kind of arrow falls on an animal and traps it there, but it's not really enclosed. It's more like a fish on a fish hook. So since it's not enclosed, in that case, Rabbi Yosef says still it's mine, and anyone who takes it would be liable to stealing. Whereas Tanna Kama says no, only if it's in a receptacle, then it's really mine. But if it's just on a fish hook, it's not mine, and that's why Mipnei Darkei Shalom, the rabbi said no one else is allowed to take it. Next case, Misyat Hare Shote Vekatan. If a minor finds a lost item, so technically midoraita, anyone can come and take it from them because they don't have enough da'at to actually acquire it. But the rabbi said this is not nice to do, and that's going to lead to fights. A deaf person or find something, so everyone's just going to go and grab it. So B'pnei Darkei Shalom, the rabbi said don't do that. Rabbi Yosef says no, it's not because of Darkei Shalom. That's actually totally robbery. Amar Rav Chisda, Gezel Gamur midivrehem. Rav Chisda explains when Rabbi Yosef says Gezel Gamur, doesn't mean on the Doraita level. Even Rabbi Yosef would agree that a Doraita level they cannot acquire it, but rather it's the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan say if a minor or a deaf person or someone who's not fully there take something, so we give it to we consider it theirs midrabanan, and so anyone who steals it is chayav midrabanan, but it's stronger than bipnei darkei shalom. And what would be the difference between those two levels? If someone can go to court and get it back. So let's say a minor finds something, someone else goes finds a watch in the street, someone else goes and grabs it. According to the Rabbi Yosef, who says it's gezel gamur midrabanan, so then that minor can go to the court and say, listen, I found the watch and that guy just went and grabbed it. Even though midoraita, it doesn't become the minor's, but midrabanan, the rabbis say that this is gezel. So therefore, according to the Rabbi Yosef, the judges will tell the guy who grabbed it, you have to give it back. However, if it's only b'pnei darkei shalom, so then there is a prohibition. It's a takana that the rabbi said, don't grab it from the minor. But if you do grab it, then the court will not reverse and expropriate that watch and give it back to the minor. So therefore, the Darkei Shalom is a lighter prohibition than Gezel mi'derabanan. Ani haminakef berosh hazayit. Now, if you have a tree, let's say it's pe'ah, and therefore it's designated and permitted for a poor person to come and take it. But there's many poor people that are all going around there, and so one poor person goes up to the top and is taking some of the olives from the top of the tree. But while he's doing that, some of them fall down to the bottom, and so when they fall down to the bottom, other people midoraita can take them because they just fell from the movement of the tree. But the guy on top says, I'm the one that shook them loose. And so he's going to come down and say, hey, those are mine. It's going to lead to a fight. And so the rabbi said, listen, because they fell on account of the poor person that went up to the top, so he gets them, and the other poor people down the bottom should not take them. Okay. Tana, im liket v'natan beyad, hareze gezel gamur. So Braita limits this and explains that if that poor person that went up to the top of the tree, it's not just that if he just shakes it and things fall, then that's only mipnei darkei shalom. But if he actually grabs it in his hand, right, he takes a cluster of olives and then it drops, or he drops it so that he can get it later. Since it was already in his hand, he took possession of it. Then then it's really his. And that if someone else takes it, that would be full-fledged robbery. And that was a story about that. Afkana azil lehusal, hazir lehu gabra dava shadeh, ofye vekanatran tamere. Azal kamankit ve'achil. So Rav Kana, he was walking on his way to Hutzal, and he saw a certain poor person that was taking clusters from a palm tree, taking some dates, and they were falling to the ground, or he was dropping them to the ground. Now Rav Kahana, he went and he took some of those dates and ate them. So because he thought that they just fell because the tree was shaking. Amar le hazim or sheditinhu. The poor person on top said, right, master, look, I threw them down. I had them in my hands and I threw them down. Right? They didn't just drop by themselves from my shaking the tree. So therefore they are mine. Amar le me'atred Rabbi Yoshia ata. Kari alav Sadik Yesod Olam. Rav Kana said, oh, you're right. And I see that you are from the place of Rabbi Yoshia, from Hutzal. And even though Rabbi Yoshia had already died a couple of generations beforehand, I see you are from that city and you are learned and you know this halacha well. You must have learned it from Rabbi Yoshia, who was such a great master and a great teacher. And so he quoted the pasuk, a righteous man is the foundation of the world. Because he teaches so many, and that way everybody knows the correct halacha and the correct moral thing to do. And so even this poor person, he might have been poor in monetarily, but he was rich in his Torah knowledge, so much so that he corrected Rav Kahana, all right, and said, oh, these were in my hands, so therefore you're not allowed to take them. All right. En memachin biyad aniye goyim beleket p'shicha u'pe'ah mipnei darkei shalom. If a non-Jew comes along and takes some leket shicha or the pe'ah in the corner of the field, that we don't stop them, right? The farmer or the other poor people are not allowed to stop them, even though primarily these things are set aside for the local poor, and the local poor are mostly Jewish. Nevertheless, some foreigner comes along, like Ruth. Just as an example, right? So what Boaz did says, don't leave her alone. Don't give her a hard time. And so once it's open, we open it up to anyone to benefit any poor people. Tenor Rabbanan, befanasim aniye an goyim, aim aniye Yisrael, mevakerin hole goyim, aim hole Yisrael, mekoberin, mete goyim, aim mete Yisrael, mipene darkei shalom. A beautiful baraita, also found in the Tosefta, that says we provide for the poor people of other nations, along with the poor people of the Jewish people. In other words, if let's say we have a Jewish communal service organization that helps poor people from the Jewish community, if a non-Jew shows up and says, can you help me as well, then we should help them, even if it's primarily that people are donating and to this because it's to help the Jewish community, but you should not discriminate. And similarly, if you're going and visiting people, we used to do this. We used to go visit people in the hospital, and we have some kind of list of Jewish patients or community members who are patients there. But then you pass by a room, and so you don't just not say hello to other people. Sometimes there was 2 people in the room, and you're visiting one. So also visit the other, right? It's appropriate to go and give help to anyone. Same thing with Hatzalah, right? It's primarily created and funded to help in emergencies for the Jewish community, but obviously they help anyone who is in need. And also, if you have a fund to help people that can't afford a funeral, and someone who's not Jewish comes and applies, then we should help out and bury Gentiles along, just as we help bury Jews who are indigent. And all this is because of Darkei Shalom. And this is not a low-level reason. This is actually a high-level. This is the best reason to do something, because having peace with neighbors, having a nice being friends with our community, having a good neighborhood, right, and showing that we care for others and actually caring for others, and hopefully that way they will care for us as well, creates a nice human bonds and good peaceful relations all around. So that's a beautiful halacha, which does make it halacha l'maaseh into Rambam's Mishneh Torah. Okay, next Mishnah. Hamash'elet isha lechaverta hashuda ala shevi'it nafa uchbara v'rechaim v'tanur aval lo tabor v'lo titchan imah. One way that people are friendly with each other, especially neighbors, is when they cook together, right? You borrow an egg, borrow some flour, come over, and so often people would come and cook together, and women would become friends in that way. So a woman is allowed to lend to a friend, even though the friend is suspected regarding Shavi'it. Shavi'it, something that grows by itself, you're allowed to eat on Shavi'it, but not if you cultivated it. And also, once it runs out in that neighborhood, then you can't store it. You can't hoard things on Shavi'it. But if you have a woman, someone who is suspected of violating Shavi'it, so now they have produce in their home against the laws of Shavi'it, and she asks her neighbor, hey, can I borrow a utensil? A sieve, a mill, or an oven? It is permitted. Since I don't know what she's going to use it for, if she's going to definitely use it for something that's not kosher, or will use it for kosher, so I can give her this oven and she'll bake something in it. And I don't have to worry, and it's not my problem. I mean, even though we say, Lifnei ived lo titen michshol, I shouldn't put a stumbling block and help someone sin. But in this case, I don't know if they're going to use it for sinning. I know that they're not careful with Shavi'it, but they also have kosher food, they have not kosher food. And so therefore, Mipnei Darkei Shalom, you know what? Go and be a nice neighbor and have good relations. That's more important. However, so to lend them something, yes. But to go over to the house and help them by actually grinding wheat or selecting, right, borer, taking the grain from the chaff, grinding it, that I shouldn't do, because that's more directly helping her. I know that she goes and takes Shavi'it wheat, and then I'm going to be helping her grind that wheat, so that's more directly helping her with a sin. So that I'm not allowed to do. So Darkei Shalom has its limits, right? Like today, if you go, someone invites you to their home and they're serving pig, you could say, as much as I want to be your friend and eat over, I just can't do that, right? But if it's something that you're machmir on and they're not machmir on, you have two dishwashers and they only have one dishwasher. So, okay, there's halachic opinions that say that's okay too. So if it's more indirect, then one should try their best to go over there and eat together and have friendly relations. Okay, that's the first part. Eshet chaver mash'elet le'eshet am ha'aretz nafa uchbara u'boreret v'tochenet u'merakedet imah. And now we have a second situation that's more lenient, and this is a wife of a chaver. Chaver are people that are very meticulous in terumah and maaser and tumah and tahara. She can lend to her friend who's an Amma Aretz. Amma Aretz follow mitzvot. So this Amma Aretz is better than someone that's chashud al Shavi'it. Amma Aretz would not eat Shavi'it, and they take terumah, and usually they even take terumah maaser. Even take maaser. But they're not always so careful. They don't necessarily always take maaser. They're not so careful regarding tum'ah. So even though Eshet Chaver, she's very careful, she is permitted and should lend to her Am Ha'aretz neighbor, a sieve. And furthermore, she can even go and help her grind and sift and select the grains from the chaff and work with it, because this is all kosher food, right? And so you don't have to worry, because we're going to see two explanations for this, right? But one of them is that most Amei Haaretz take teruma and maaser, and everything is kosher. They're just not quite as careful 100% of the time as a chaver. But since usually they are, so then you can for Darkei Shalom, you can go ahead and help them out, right? Even though, if they gave you food, and you would the chaver would take teruma maaser again, just in case they didn't, right? But it's a chumrah. Okay, so therefore, the Keshalom, go ahead and prepare food with them. That's fine. However, once the Amei Haaretz woman puts water after she grinds the flour and then adds water to make dough, then this raises the prohibition, because now that it's wet, it can receive tum'ah. This is a general principle, and produce, anything that never became wet on purpose, is not susceptible to tum'ah. Once it becomes wet, then it is susceptible to tum'ah. We're assuming now that these grains did not yet become wet from the time that they were plucked until now that they are ground and being mixed with water to make dough. So once that happens, once they mix water, then the eshet chaver should not touch it together with the Amei Haaretz, because lefi she'en machazikin yedei ovre avera, because then they're touching something and making it tameh. Now, what are they making tameh? The Gemara also will discuss this. Is this chulin? Is this teruma or challah? Teruma and challah, you're not allowed to make it tameh mideoraita. If it's chulin, then we saw one opinion, one law, that in Eretz Yisrael, you're not allowed to purposely make even chulin tameh, so there should be a lot of tahor food available. It might be drabanan, or even less, a chumrah, to not do that. The chaverim would make sure to eat their chulin always betahara. So here, depending on what that is, so we shouldn't directly help out. We can assume, yes, that this person keeps teruma, maaser, so therefore, yes, I'll lend you my winnow, and I'll even help grind with you. But if it becomes wet and therefore susceptible to tum'ah, then I can't have a hand, literally have a hand in making this food tameh. And all of these cases are to keep the peace. As much as possible, you can't violate a strict halacha just because you want to be friends. You can't violate a deoraita law. But as much as possible within the boundaries of halacha, well, even though I'm machmir for myself on certain things, but if that chumrah is going to come between friendship with a neighbor, then better to have good relations with a neighbor. If a non-Jew is working the land during the Shivi'it, so the Jew can assist. Doesn't mean assist by physically going and doing work on the land, because a Jew is not allowed, but in an indirect way, giving them advice, telling them, you're doing a great job, go for it. So you can do that indirectly, because they don't have a prohibition of working the land. And also one can extend a greeting, ask anyone, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. You can even use the word shalom, which is considered one of God's names, and all that is permitted, and it increases peace and good friendships and neighborliness. And so therefore one should do that. And so it's true, even though you disagree and they believe in some kind of pagan thing or whatever, but still you can seek out their well-being and just be a polite person. Okay, Maishana Resha or Maishana Sefa. So now we're going to ask the first case that said you're not allowed to go and help them grind, and in the first case, where she's chashuda al shevi'it, but in the second case where the eshet chaver is allowed to go ahead and help grind with help the eshet amaretz grind her flour. So what's the difference between the two? Amar Abaye, Rov Ame'aretz me'aserin hen. Abaye says most, the vast majority of Ame'aretz take teruma and ma'aser, and therefore the first case is someone who's suspected to violate Shavi'it. That's a serious Deoraita law. Okay, so I'll lend you my items because I hope you'll use it for something good, but I can't go and grind your Shavi'it produce. In the second case, I'm Aretz, so listen, I'm Machmir, and I make sure to take Maaser again for anything that I would take from you to eat in my house. But I'm coming over to your house. I should assume that you already took to the Mama said, and assume the best for the sake of friendship, because most people, even Amei Aretz, do take Ma'aser. That's Abaye's opinion. Rava Amar, Hacha b'ma'aretz Rabbi Meir v'tumat tahara d'Rabanan. Detanya, Ezu Amaretz kol sheno ochel cholav b'tahara. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Chamim omrim kol sheno me'aser perotav. And so Rava says, actually there's two definitions of an Amaretz, and we're following the definition of an Amaretz according to Rabbi Meir, and we're dealing with the case of Tuman Tahara. There's the Rabbanan prohibition to make something tameh. So what are the definitions of an Amaretz? It says in this Braita, according to Rabbi Meir, it's anyone who does not eat holin. Holin means non-consecrated food, not tiruma, not chala, not maaser, just regular food like that we eat all the time. A chaver will always eat it betahara. An Amaretz, there's no prohibition here, right? There's no Deoraita prohibition. You're allowed to eat chulin, that's tameh. So that's an Amaretz. So Rabbi Meir is making his Amaretz more religious, right? They're just not careful about that, but they are careful about any law, any Deoraita laws, Teruma, Maaser. They're totally careful about all that, and so that accounts for the difference. The Resha is talking about someone who violates Shavi'it, and the Sefer is talking about someone who he only is careful about Teruma Maaser. Si Chachamim say Amaretz is someone who does not take Maaser, or is not always careful about taking Maaser from their grain. So if it was according to that definition, then that would be a problem to go and work with them. However, right, according to the Rabbi Meir, they Amaretz are careful with Maaser. They just don't eat things betahara. So because they're tameh, so a chaver says, a chaver makes sure to eat things or everything betahara, and that's why once it becomes wet, so then the chaver says, no, that at this point I can't go and knead the dough with you because I'm careful not to make cholin tameh. All right. Hold on. Now we have to explain, right, both of the subclauses within the Amaretz case. The second clause says once it becomes wet, then the eshet chaver should not touch the dough with her, right? Because now it's susceptible to tum'ah. So now, what case is the Resha talking about? That's where it did not become wet, it did not become susceptible to tum'ah. So then, why do you need to tell me mipnei darkei shalom? I'm gonna, right? Because I want to make peace with my neighbor. I'm gonna go out of my way, even though I'm a chaver. I'm gonna go and help grind flour with you, my neighbor. What's the chidush? There's no prohibition at all. My neighbor Amaretz is careful with teruma, with maaser, and it's not susceptible to tumah. So you don't need any chidush to say that this is mipnei darkei shalom. So the answer is resha v'sefa betuma v'tahara, v'resha betumat cholin, sefa betumat hala. There's a different. Okay, the becoming wet is not about becoming susceptible to tum'ah, but rather, once it becomes dough, now it's obligated in challah. So we're assuming that the wheat became wet before, right? They washed the wheat already before they ground it up. And so it was always susceptible to tum'ah, and therefore in the resha it was chulin. It's just regular wheat, and in that case it's Amaretz, but according to the Rabbi Meir, so that means they took teruma and maaser. And the only problem is the chumrah that you shouldn't make chulin tameh. And even though the chaver generally would not involve himself in tum'ah for chulin and always make sure to have everything tahor, but because of Darkei Shalom, listen, okay, your chumrah is making you not be friends with your neighbor. So we should relax that chumrah and go and help out your neighbor and go and grind the grain with them. That is permitted. However, in the sefa, once you mix it with dough, and we're assuming that's a big dough, now it's chayav in challah. So part of this dough is challah, and teruman challah, you're not allowed to make tameh mid-deoraita. So here, even though, I'd love to be friends with my neighbor, but still you can't violate a deoraita, and that's why the sefa says once it becomes wet, then you have to, then you cannot knead the dough along with the amad, its neighbor. All right, good. So now that was all the explanation of Rava. We have a challenge against Rava. Urminhu tochaninu mafkidin etzel ochle shvi'it ve'etzel ochle perotehen betum'ah, aval lo le'ochle shvi'it ve'lo le'ochle perotehen betum'ah. This Tosefta teaches that I can go in and grind my produce and I can deposit it with someone who is suspected that they eat prohibited shvi'it produce, or someone who eats their regular fruit while they're tameh. Even though I'm careful about these things, well, you have to be careful about l'chrei shvi'it. I'm also careful about eating things b'tumal because I'm a chaver. Even so, I can give it to you as a deposit. Can you watch this for me until I get back next month? And I don't have to worry that you're going to exchange it with your tum'ah food or your shvi'it food. I can trust you. That is permitted. But what I cannot do is I cannot grind for you. If I'm, let's say, I'm a professional grinder, I can, and you bring me shvi'it produce, I can't grind it. It's not allowed. Or if you're someone who eats perot, and you eat it betum'ah, I'm not allowed to assist because I'm careful about that, and so I can't. That's too direct. So I can deposit things with you. I don't think that you're going to exchange it, but I can't directly help you and grind things for you or with you. Now this last clause is a contradiction to Rava, because Rava said that we're talking about Ameh Haaretz who are careful about Tumah Maseh. They're just not careful about eating chulin betum'ah. And Bipnei Darkei Shalom, we say that a neighbor can go and grind flour together with her neighbor, even though it's betum'ah, because it's chulin. So it's only astringency is permitted, and here it says it's not allowed. So Rava, what's your answer? And Abaye comes to Rava's rescue. Amar Abaye, hatam bechohen hechashud le'achol teruma betum'ah askinan, dahavale tum'ah deoraita. So no, this case here, this beraita, we're talking about a kohen who has terumah food. It's not chulin, and he's going to eat this terumah betum'ah, and that is a violation mideoraita. That's why in that case, this person who's coming and say, "Can you grind this for me?" is a kohen, and he has terumah. So this is a biblical violation. There, I'm not allowed to help him grind. That's why it's a bigger violation, but. And the Braita above, we were talking in our Mishnah, rather, we were talking about only chulin that's tameh, which is only a chumrah, and that I should do and be a good neighbor. Ihachi mafkidin urminhu mafkidin teruma etzel Yisrael am haaretz velo etzel kohen am haaretz mipnei shelibo gasba. According to you, that you explain the braita above, we'll call that braita number 1. That this entire braita we're talking about, where it's a kohen who is not careful, right? That's how you explain the second part of it. Then how about the first part of it that says, I can take my produce and I can deposit it with someone who is suspected, and we're talking about someone suspected of, it's a kohen who even would have terumah betum'ah. So then, according to the first braita, I am allowed to deposit my produce with a kohen that's suspected in this way. But look at this braita number 2, we'll call this. What it means, we have a contradiction, because here it says, I can deposit my terumah, if I'm a kohen, with or whoever, if I'm holding terumah, doesn't matter if I'm kohen or not, I can deposit it with a Yisrael am haaretz, even though that Yisrael's am haaretz but he'll be careful not to exchange that terumah with anything else, not to touch that terumah, because, right, he knows, oh, that's terumah, I'll be careful with it. Even amei aretz, generally, you're going to be careful with terumah. But I cannot deposit it with a kohen who's an amei aretz, because a kohen amei aretz, he's accustomed to terumah. He's, oh, I'm a kohen, I can touch terumah, right? But he's an amei aretz, and he's not careful about tumah and tahara, and so he's going to go and touch this terumah that I'm depositing with him, and make it tameh, which is a big problem, and therefore I'm not allowed, right? So it's actually worse to deposit with a kohen than to a Yisrael. So now we have a contradiction. Braita number 1 says I can deposit it with the kohen amei aretz, and Braita number 2 says I may not deposit with the kohen amei aretz. So we have to resolve this according to Abaye's interpretation that we're talking about a kohen amei aretz. Amar Rabbi El'a hacha b'mayeskinan b'chli cheres amukaf samid patil. So Rabbi El'a says that the first braita that's permissive is talking about a case where I give him the terumah inside an earthenware vessel that's tightly bound, that the cover is tightly bound, is covered, it's sealed with an airlock seal. Is something in an earthenware vessel that has no that is covered and sealed cannot receive tum'ah from touching it from outside, and that's why in that first case I don't have to worry that the kohen amei aretz is going to touch it, because even if he does touch it, it doesn't become tameh, it's sealed up. And the second case, the second braita where it says you're not allowed, that's talking about where it's in an unsealed vessel or a non-earthenware vessel. Now he asks, V'lechu shema tesitenu ishto nida. Wait about it. Maybe that kohen amei aretz's wife will touch it, will move it while she's nida. Even though something that's enclosed in an earthenware vessel cannot receive tum'ah by touch or by ohel, it can receive tum'ah by moving. If a nida or zava move it around, then it will become tameh. So I should still worry about it. So that answer doesn't work. We need another answer to resolve the two baraitot. Instead, we'll say that the second baraita is talking about produce that became wet and is susceptible to tumah, and therefore I cannot give it to this kohen amei aretz because he's going to say, oh, this is tumah, I'm accustomed to tumah, I'm going to touch it, and he will impart tumah on it. The first baraita that said it's allowed, even though that's also talking about depositing with a kohen amei aretz, is okay because that never got wet, is not susceptible to tumah, and therefore even if the kohen touches it, no problem, it will not become tameh. Urminu, but now we have a challenge to that answer. This is from a Mishnah. Hamolich chitin letochen kuti or letochen amei aretz hare elu bechezkatan lemaaser ulshviit aval lo letum'ah. This Mishnah in Demai says, I bring my wheat to a professional grinder, and this professional grinder is a Samaritan or a amei aretz who's not careful about tum'ah. So I can assume that they didn't switch one for the other. I brought them good kosher produce, and so regarding maaser and shvi'it, I don't have to worry that they switched my kosher food with food that has maaser in it, or that's food that's prohibited by shvi'it. They're not going to exchange it, but I do have to worry about tum'ah because they're not going to be careful about tum'ah, and so therefore I cannot assume that it's tahor once I gave it to them. And so this is a challenge because here we say that I am concerned that someone will touch it. And in the first baraita above, we said I'm not concerned that the kohen will touch it. So how do we resolve that? So we say that's not a good question. We already said that the first baraita is talking about produce that did not become susceptible to tum'ah, and that's why I don't worry about that kohen amei aretz touching it. But the second baraita, it did become susceptible, and so let's assume here that this is also talking about food that it became susceptible to tum'ah. That's why I'm worried that this a grinder who's an amei aretz will touch it. So this is an easy answer. So it's such an easy answer. We say, Udekadela, my kadela. The person that asked the question, what were they even thinking in asking the question? And the answer is Mishum achariti Allah. Actually, quoting this Mishnah was only a setup for the next question. They really wanted to ask something else, and they needed to quote this Mishnah just to set up for the next thing. This is actually an important style, especially in the Talmud Bavli, that a lot of times, instead of just bringing a list of sources, it will link them together by question and answer. It makes it a lot easier to remember, and you learn a lot of things on the way. So even if it's going to be a simple answer, maybe we gave the same answer already 5 times. We're going to bring it again as a question and answer, just to link it with each other, and also to help set up the continuation of the argument exactly as we do here. Okay, so here's we want to ask the next question on it. Hare elo bechezkatan lemaaser uleshevi'it vechalufe lachayshinan. In the Mishnah that we just quoted, it says, I can assume that they're not going to switch one with the other. I can give the Ama'aretz my grain, and I'll come back in 2 hours, and I'll have it ready for me, and I assume it's the same grain that I gave him. It was kosher when I gave it to him. It's still kosher now. That's the question we want to ask. Minhu hanoten la hamorto maaser et shehu noten la ve'et shehu notel hemena mipnei shechashuda mechalefet hamitkalkel. Another Mishnah in the same perek in Masechet Demai says that if I have some produce, some grain, I give it to my mother-in-law, I have to take maaser before I give it to her, right? That's only proper. Let's say she's an Ama'aretz, so I can't assume that she's going to take maaser, so I should take maaser before I give it to her. And when I take it back from her, I should take maaser again, because I worry that she switched it in the middle. Why would she switch it? Well, it's not because we don't trust mothers-in-law, but rather it's because we worry that she's going to, let's say I give her food that was spoiled, and then she's going to like, this grain that my son-in-law gave me is a little spoiled. I'm going to switch it for something else instead. And so, therefore, we worry that she's going to switch the produce that I gave her, that is maaser, that I took maaser, she'll switch it with others, that's tebel. Therefore, whatever I give her, I have to take maaser, and whatever I get back from her, I also have to take maaser. There's a question, how come in the case with the grinder, whatever I give him, I assume he gave me the same back, he's not going to exchange it, but here's a problem, because with the mother-in-law, I assume that she is going to exchange it and give me a hard time. Hatam kedekatene ta'ama, amar biyuda, rosahi, betakanat bita ubosha, mehatana. Says, no, there. It's not because the mother-in-law is trying to mess you up. It's actually because mother-in-laws are nice, and mother-in-law will always want what's good for her daughter and to give her the best food, not spoiled food. And she's going to be ashamed to tell her son-in-law, listen, the grain that you gave me was kind of old and moldy, and so I switched it for something better. She's not going to say so because she wants to be nice, actually, and not embarrass him, and they want them to have the best food. Therefore, because mother-in-laws are nice, that's why we worry that they're going to exchange this bad grain that I gave her for something that's better. And therefore I have to take maaser when I give it to her, and maaser when I take it back from her, assuming that the mother-in-law is an ama'aris. However, in the case of the grinder is not going to switch out what I gave him. All right, he's not going to say, well, the grain you gave me is no good, I'm going to give you better grain back. No, the grinder is just there for business and is not going to switch it. So therefore, I can paradoxically trust the grinder more than my mother-in-law. And according to this, I only don't trust the mother-in-law because she's nice, but a general person, I could trust that they're not going to switch what I gave them. V'hatanan, another challenge from another Mishnah in Masechet Demai. Hanoten lepundakit maaser et shehu noten la ve'et shehu notel hemena mipnei shemehalefet. If I give some food to an innkeeper, I'm staying at this inn, and so I have some grain. I say, here, can you store this for me in your kitchen? I have to take maaser before I give it to her, and when I take it back from her, I have to take maaser again. Right, so I give her some grain and she's going to bake it for me. Why? Because I worry that she switches it. So here, it's not my mother-in-law, and yet I have to worry that she'll switch it. So this is a contradiction to the grinder. And the answer is, we're talking about a nice innkeeper. An innkeeper is going to say to herself, right, this person is as a Torah student. And so it's better that the student should eat nice, warm, fresh bread that I will make from my own grain, and I'll eat the old bread from this moldy grain that that I gave her in the first place. So because the innkeeper is going to be extra nice and may very well go and use other grain, or maybe she already has a bread from her own grain that she just made and it's nice and hot, so she'll serve that, right, instead of using my grain that I gave her. So because she wants to be nice, she will switch out her grain instead of my grain to serve something better in her inn. So therefore, we're also talking here about a nice person, and that's why I have to worry. Whereas the grinder, I don't have to worry about that. The grinder is switching. Okay, so now we ask again on this presumption based on that earlier Tosefta that I can give my grain to an Mishnah, that I can give my grain to an Aretz and they're not going to switch it. So right now we're saying Aretz are basically trustworthy. They're not trustworthy about Tumah or Maaser, but they are trustworthy. They're not going to steal and switch one grain for another. Is that true? We can quote the following Tosefta that shows that Amei Haaretz are not trustworthy, even regarding stealing, and certainly they would switch. What's the case? והתניא אשת חבר טוחנת עם אשת עם הארץ בזמן שהיא טמאה, אבל לא בזמן שהיא טהורה. You have אשת חבר, and she goes and she's helping out to grind grain with an אשת עם הארץ, and that's permitted as long as Eshet Chaved is Teme'ah. She's Nida, or whatever. She's Tameh for whatever reason. So because she's Teme'ah, a Chaved is not going to touch food while they're Tameh. And so they're not going to touch food. They're certainly not going to go and eat the food. And therefore, she doesn't have to worry. She can ask us, I'll help you out. And we don't worry that she's going to go and take something, and that the Chaved is going to eat something. That could be that you didn't take Maaser. But not when she's Tehorah. If the Eshet Chaved is Tehorah, then she's going to be used to touching food, tasting some of it, and then she may very well eat from the food of the Eshet Haaretz, which is Tevel. Okay, that's part one. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer, אף בזמן שהיא טמאה לא תטחון, מפני שחברתה נותנת לה ואוכלת. The question is from this part. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that even when the Eshet Chaved is Teme'ah, she still should not go over and help out with her friend, because her friend, who's Am Haaretz, will take some of her own grain and say, here, why don't you taste some? You know, you're working so hard over here. Have a snack, eat something. And that will be Tevel. That's the end of the Tosefta. We say, now here's the question. In this case, this wife is actually stealing from her husband. Such a thing, you can steal from your husband. Husband said, here's this grain, go and grind it. The husband didn't give permission to the wife to share some of it with her friend. And she decided on her own, you know what, I'm going to just take some grain and give it to someone else. So you see that an Am Haaretz is not trustworthy even regarding stealing. So all the more so, she should not be trustworthy regarding exchanging, which is not really stealing. I'm just exchanging one of the same type for another. And therefore, this is a contradiction, because here we say Am Haaretz are not trustworthy for exchanging. They're not even trustworthy for stealing. And in the Mishnah above, we said that I can give my grain to an Am Haaretz grinder, and I'm not worried that they're going to exchange it. And the final answer, Amar Rav Yosef, Hatam Name, Modia ve'amra, Torah midisheh, and this is no. In this case, Amei Haaretz are not thieves either, and we're not worried that they're going to exchange or that they're going to steal. In this case, she justifies what she's doing, because she says, even an ox that I'm working in the field, that's a halakha in the Torah, that the ox has to be allowed to thresh from what it's working. My friend is here, my neighbor, she came over to help me to grind here. So all the more so, she should be able to eat if she's hungry. So that's why she thought that it's allowed, not because she thought that she didn't care about stealing. And therefore, Am Haaretz is trusted regarding stealing and is trusted regarding exchanging, and that resolves all the problems. This is why I can give my grain to an Am Haaretz grinder, and I'm not worried that they're going to switch out one to the other. They might make it tameh, but if it's kosher, it'll remain kosher. The only people I can trust are nice people, like my mother-in-law and a nice innkeeper, because they might take my bad grain and switch it for better grain. In that case, I would have to take the ma'aseh again when I receive it from them. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.